Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this NAC at Home program, our conversation about the documentary The Sit-In, the week that The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was hosted by Mr. Harry Belafonte. My name is Charles Snyder, and along with my friend Laura Daly, I am one of the co-chairs of the Roundtable Committee here at the National Arts Club. The National Arts Club is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are based in New York City. Our mission is to stimulate, foster, and promote public interest in the arts. How do we do that? We do that by offering more than 150 programs that are free to the public each year, including art exhibitions, theatrical performances, musical performances, lectures, and readings. Visit us at nationalartsclub.org or find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And now, the National Arts Club is privileged and honored to welcome our guest, author, TV news analyst, and documentary producer Joan Walsh to discuss the documentary The Sit-In, about a special week in 1968 when The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was hosted by Mr. Harry Belafonte. Before our guest joins us, however, we have something very special to share. Here is an excerpt from The Sit-In.
We know Harry Belafonte had been burned by television before. In 1959, he had this special called Tonight with Belafonte. It was fantastic. It won an Emmy. And the sponsor, which was Revlon, actually offered him an ongoing series after that. He called it New York 19.
Well, if it's so, I don't want to be a monkey. I'll go to sheep, a mule, or donkey. My brother said that he will come back a hog. Not Harry, I think I'll be a bedbug.
The first episode ran in 1960 to rave reviews. But when he started to plan the next episode, the sponsor called him in and had a problem with the fact that Harry used multiracial cast. And the sponsor told him, pick a black cast, but none of this mixing. And Harry walked away.
Thank you for being with us. See you around.
My father didn't always trust what the outcomes of a certain opportunity might bring, and so he turned a lot of things down.
Tonight, we take a look at Negro humor in America. We call it A Time for Laughter.
If it wasn't going to be in an inclusive way that he envisioned, both racially, but I think most importantly, artistically, let alone politically, didn't want that to be part of his legacy.
I believe that's a bird dog. That sounds like a rabbit dog. Oh, that's an old civil rights chaser.
Being on television, reaching a lot of people, and having this amazing opportunity that might only come once in your entire lifetime. And Harry Belafonte had to be convinced.
It was Johnny who put me at ease and said, we just want you to be who you are. And I said, in order to be who I am, I'd have to have guests on that share some of my beliefs.
He agreed to that condition with the understanding that the network had the right to say no to anybody, but they wanted me to submit my list.
After a little bit of wrangling, they gave him control of the guest list, which was a huge deal.
So was there trepidation? I'm sure there was trepidation. I'm sure there was trepidation.
And who knows what's going to happen? Is he going to have, a mix of people on? Is it going to be black people and white people? Does he have restrictions?
When you see pictures of the guests, they didn't just pass each other. They knew each other. So I envision Mr. Belafonte making half those calls himself, saying, hey, I need you to come on by here and do this show. So he was probably his booker and the host of the show.
Do you remember how it felt to be on the show?
I hardly know where I was yesterday. Since 1968. But wow, it was quite some nice company.
Is he here? Floyd Patterson is here, friends. And you're in Selma, Alabama.
All of these people who not only were great artists, but some of them were also great thinkers.
It's the biggest feeling I ever had in my life, to be actively involved in being part of my own times.
He had all types of people on that week, but like the sheer volume of activists that he had on is mind-blowing, especially in such a political hotbed at the time.
He fights with missiles and with spears.
The fact that he was able to feel in the space with people that had substance was amazing to me. And to use that platform, that's unprecedented for the times.
I wanted to bring a political dimension to the evening that was not quite the Tonight Show thing.
I want to make this announcement.
As I said, everybody wants to hear what Dr. King has to say and Bobby Kennedy has to say. It'll be good for your ratings. They were considered the spokespersons for the mood of the nation.
There's a story of somebody with the network asking, Dr. King is going to talk about that civil rights stuff, is he?
It was a silly question. If we've got him here, what would you like him to do? Sing a song?
Ladies and gentlemen, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. How old were you when you started with the Montgomery, Alabama bus strike?
Well, I was 27 at that time. That was back in 1956.
Got to ask one other question. After this word from your local station.
To welcome producer of the sit-in, Joan Walsh. Joan, thank you so much on behalf of the club for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled.
The inspiration, perhaps, something I read in your February 2017 article that you wrote for The Nation about the week that Mr. Harry Belafonte hosted the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was very moving, and I could tell from reading Mr. Belafonte's memoir, when you learned about this, you were intrigued, curious, very interested. Could you share with us, please, about when you first discovered about this special week?
Yes, I can't take credit for really digging anything up because there is a chapter in his 2013 memoir, My Song, that talks about it. And but I just remember reading it and it just jumped out at me like, how do I not know this? My parents were both Belafonte fans and Johnny Carson fans. Why would I not? Why is this not taught in our, if not history, entertainment history? And I became, kind of obsessed with it actually. And I knew it was a documentary, but I had no experience. So after, kind of shuffling around there, trying to figure out if there's any way to do it, I just decided to do what I do, which is write. And I contacted him, and he was very excited and very forthcoming. And part of it, at that point, I don't think he was quite 90 yet, but he was already forgetting some people who were on the show. So I would come back to him and I would say, I got in touch with Buffy St. Marie, and he was, he was very excited about it. So the piece came out, and I just have to give so much credit to The Nation magazine where I work because they gave me so much time on it. It was very labor intensive. But they stuck with it, this little piece of history. And when it came out, my friend Joy Reid at MSNBC, who also has a documentary background, had me on her show, and she was literally sitting there. We were on camera, I think, if you look back, and she's like, "Sis, this is a documentary." And we went out for brunch afterwards and talked about it. And then we got another mutual friend, Valerie Thomas, to come be a co-producer. And so it took off, and we were pretty quickly able to get Mr. B to bless it and also help us contact people, whether it was, the surviving guests or else, commentators that we wanted to talk to. He was just incredibly generous with his time.
Well, the article, Joan, the title of the article for our guests was titled 49 years ago, Harry Belafonte hosted The Tonight Show, and it was amazing. And the article is amazing. I've seen the documentary 3 times, and part of it, it's so charming when you're talking to Mr. Belafonte and you share with him the guest list. And I mean, talk about the superstars of the time. I wrote down a couple of his guests: Aretha Franklin, Wilt Chamberlain, Nipsey Russell, Robert Goulet, Dionne Warwick, Lena Horne, the Smothers Brothers, Paul Newman, and Senator Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When I saw that scene where you shared the guest list with him, I did a little research on my own, and the show, I believe, was 90 minutes long.
I believe that's true back then, yeah.
So he really had quite a number of guests to interview live. And he started each program. I read in your article and learned in the documentary that he would perform a song and a dance, performed a piece instead of the kind of the monologue.
Right.
Share a little bit about the creative license that Carson and The Tonight Show gave him, which was, unprecedented, one might say.
It was unprecedented, and I think you got that from that clip. He asked for it, although he did know that he had to let them know, give them a heads up about the guest list. But they said yes to everyone. Just, there's one silly question about Dr. King, but they went ahead with it. And, that was very rare. And I think the combination of guests, he really wanted, he didn't want it to be all politics. He didn't want it to be all comedy. He really wanted a mix. He wanted a racial mix, but he was also very keen on showing the extraordinary talent in the Black community, exposing the Carson audience to conversations that the white Carson audience, let's say, to conversations that they weren't necessarily privy to about the civil rights movement, about being a Black entertainer. And so, he had multiple agendas, but his top, I shouldn't say his top agenda, very high on his list was that it be fun, and that it be entertaining. And he doesn't talk about it without telling you how great the ratings were, and they were. And that, he's an entertainer, and he wanted that. He was not doing, a didactic piece of, let me tell you what you need to know about the Black experience or the Vietnam War. That was in there, But he also had he showed water skiing, home movies from a boat that he took his friends and family on and taught his kids to water ski. And, the group of friends was Black and white. And so it was not, he never had to say, my friends are Black and white. It was like you saw it in the things that he shared. You saw his comfort, and, he really created a world. He willed this world into being where there really was racial harmony and people really enjoyed each other. And it just, the other thing that I felt reading it, which I want to say was as far back as 2013. It was 2013. I just felt like I'd missed out, and that in some ways, race relations at a certain level were better back then, or, there was both clearly an effort to do something different, but also to show that there were people comfortable in this mixed setting. And it almost felt like we'd gone backwards in a certain sense, despite having, a Black president and on all the very real change we've made. There was something magical about just the way people enjoyed each other.
Well, your article, again, I'm referring again to the article, Joan, from The Nation. You have just a fantastic quote by legendary TV producer Norman Lear, who said in your article about Mr. Belafonte, he was an ambassador in both directions, to his own people and to the Caucasian community. There wasn't anyone else like him. It is rare to this day. share a little bit, and you go into this on the documentary, about how and why Carson selected Mr. Belafonte for this week, and why Mr. Belafonte?
Right. Well, sadly, he's gone, and no one, no, to my knowledge, no one but Harry talked to him about it. But Harry's story is that it was, as you know, as many of our audience knows, and if people don't, 1968 was one of the most tumultuous years in American history since the Civil War, and preceding the events of January 6th. Had been rioting, uprisings, rebellions for several years in the cities. The Vietnam War movement was really picking up steam. There was a rising Black Power movement that was rejecting the leadership of people like Dr. King. There was a real sense, and Carson had this sense himself, that the country was fracturing, and we needed to have more voices kind of pulling us together rather than yelling at us to, split up. And so he approached Harry. I'm not sure exactly how overt the political angle was, but it was implicit, if not explicit, in the time. And Harry said no at first. He just didn't see himself in that role. He several people said this to us when we were making the film. He was such a quintessential Midwesterner. Is Nebraska the Midwest? I never know where it ends or starts. But
Yeah,
anyway,
right.
the middle. He's the white guy, middle of the road guy from the middle of the country. Super soothing. He's the last person a lot of people saw before they went to bed. And then to put Harry there was radical in itself, right? But he also was an entertainer himself with this very important franchise, and knew that Harry would bring a different audience, and probably bring a high audience, and that Harry had access to guests that he might not have, who would be great guests. It wasn't just, obscure history professors somewhere. Although one of the things I love, which I don't think we say in the film, the poet laureate at the time, Marianne Moore, was one of his guests. So it was really like the most eclectic guest list you can imagine. But for both Harry and Johnny, the emphasis was on having people enjoy it, and so also, again, it's hard to realize what a superstar Belafonte was. He was he won Grammys, he won Tony. He had the first million-selling record. He just could do it all, and he was welcome in so many spaces. And so that there was nobody else. As Norman Lear says, it's kind of got a couple of meanings. There was nobody else in entertainment who could pull that together, but it was also his role bringing together the Black and white community, but also bringing together the entertainment and political and civil rights communities. He was the hub of that. When you see, and there's lots of footage in the film, a little bit actually in the clip you showed. When you see the celebrities at the March on Washington, he recruited all of them. And at every major event, protest, march, rally of those years, he was either the number one person, the only person, or in the top two or three, taking the lead at getting these celebrities to contribute, and including white celebrities. So that, I think Norman Lear really summed up a couple of things in that sentence.
And I felt the same. I thought there are so many meanings here. Not only does it take a special talent to, as Mr. Belafonte says, he hadn't hosted a talk show, late night talk show, let alone for 4 nights, but then someone who represented such a special, unique position. I can see why Mr. Lear would feel that way. When I think about the guest list, and again, looking through the documentary and some of the photos, and you just think, oh my gosh, if we could have seen Aretha Franklin's performance, or heard Nipsey Russell, heard that banter. It just, in the documentary, I mean, it is a stab to the heart when you find out that at that time, the studios were not recording every episode, that they were recording over the previous night's episode. Yeah. So how did you feel when you discovered that? How did that impact the direction and maybe the plan you had for this documentary?
Sure. I mean, it made it a lot harder, obviously. You know, if we'd had whatever that would have been, you know, hours and hours of footage with those superstars, you know, you wouldn't need narration. You would just run it, you know,
right?
Pretty much a little bit of commentary, but we didn't have that. So what we do have, which is miraculous, and we know somebody had to decide to save these two things. We have the full half-hour interview with Dr. King and the full half-hour interview with Bobby Kennedy. And so those are you know, pillars of the film. They also show you, though, you do get some banter on the sofa with, you know, Dr. King and Paul Newman talking politics, and little slice of Nipsey Russell, not nearly enough, you know, right, joking around. The Bobby Kennedy night, our old friend Bill Cosby is on the couch next to Kennedy. You know, so you do get to see some of the interaction. You get to see the things that Harry negotiated for himself. He would sing a song. He was not going to tell jokes. He's not a comedian, although he's very funny. And he was not going to do the commercials. Remember back then that Johnny would do commercials for Lavoris mouthwash, or, you know, Jolly Green Giant, or cigarettes.
Oldsmobile, yes.
Oldsmobile, Holiday Inn. So he did not want to have to do that. So Ed McMahon took over that role. And there are some pretty funny scenes of that too. But it just, you know, you get a flavor of how they got along, what it felt like from that full hour that we have. But yes, we didn't. There's also an amazing, mind-blowing 5-minute clip of folk singer Leon Bibb, who no one at this point has heard of, but who was astonishing, singing Leonard Cohen's Suzanne, which was just, you know, an amazing thing to find. But everything else was gone. So we had a few people kind of guessed at what they sang. We had lots of contemporaneous footage. So, you know, you get to see, you know, Aretha, 1968 Aretha. You get to see Lena Horne. You get to see Diane Carroll. You get to see Dionne Warwick. But you don't have their performances that night. And you don't have, you know, some of the comedic repartee.
And well, as you just mentioned, some of the additional footage does show that he had a personal relationship with his guests. They were not just guests. Granted, he had to put on a show that needed to be entertaining and keep up ratings. But from his relationship, for instance, with Dr. King and Aretha Franklin and down the line, you can tell it was just a very heartfelt, warm couch. And when I was watching it the very first time, I said out loud, "Oh my gosh, if somebody could have asked Ed McMahon about that week." I mean, he sat,
that too, I know.
He sat there, and Ed McMahon saw it all. You mentioned this in the documentary. Share with us, please. You know, Dr. King was talking to a friend that he was facing some new heavy challenges at that time. Both he and Senator Kennedy were. Share a little bit about the significance of the time that conversation took place.
Right. Well, you know, the Dr. King that we see in the film, he's very happy. He's happy. He's talking to his friend. He's funny. You know, some people have said to me, he actually seems lighter. You know, he's got a sense of humor. He tells a joke. But on the other hand, it was not an easy time for him. He had come out against the Vietnam War a year before and got slammed for it. The New York Times was scathing, stick to civil rights. No one cares what you think of, Vietnam. He was also moving out into the area of poverty, and he was organizing a poor people's campaign, which eventually did happen, halfway at least, after he was assassinated. But he was getting pushback from his closest allies for that. Why are we going towards the issue of poverty, but also multiracial poverty? Why are we talking? He held a meeting with, white Appalachians and Chicanos from California and American Indians. And, some of the people with his leadership group, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, were like, Black people still have the worst problems. What we're actually going to spend money on bringing together all these groups when we're not done with our agenda. But of course, he thought that the agenda wouldn't move farther without more attention to the vast economic disparities that affected races really. And then I guess the third thing was, there was a rising Black Power movement that really felt like Dr. King's time had come and left. And they were, not really having it with nonviolence. They were, being beaten by police and sometimes by, white mobs. And they were tired of turning the other cheek. And they really felt like, his day was over and his methods were over. So Harry was also being a bridge within the Black community and within Black factions who, the young people really respected Harry. The great historian Taylor Branch recalls that, Harry's apartment was kind of like a space where both groups felt comfortable and he could bring them together and he could mediate some of those conflicts. But the Dr. King of that week, the first week in February 1968, is not the Dr. King we celebrate, every January 15th. He's he's under a lot of strain, and he's not at his high point. It's not the March on Washington Dr. King either. He's a little bit in the wilderness.
Well, I can't, and nor would I dare share it, but that joke that he tells is damn funny. I mean, it is a very, very, very amusing story to hear from Dr. King.
Yeah.
In the same way that you just shared what was going on with Dr. King, Joan, share how significant the week was also in Senator Kennedy's life, because I know he had said that at that point he had said he was not going to run for president. He did later on, but he was facing some new challenges too.
Yeah, he was facing, a lot of people calling on him to run. He was, for a long time not willing to do it. His family didn't want him to take the risk. And he says to Harry, my position, our position on Vietnam right now, being against the war, is a minority position. The majority of the country doesn't think like we do. He doubted he would win the nomination. And so he was saying no. And, there's a really cute minute in the film where Harry says to me, I was really hoping to have a scoop like you journalists say, and that, he would announce he was running on my show, but he didn't. And he did about a month. It was about a month later. One of the things that happened was that Lyndon Johnson declared that he would not run. And so, the whole scene got very mixed up. And so, he was really suffering over that decision. But then made it, a month later.
Joan, we have many questions. I think many of them are going to have to be answered by watching the documentary, but I'd like to share a couple of them with you that our guests have asked. Someone you had mentioned this at the beginning of our conversation. How were the ratings? I mean, this had to be, as far as the TV executives and the Tonight Show and Carson, a little bit of an experiment. But how did the ratings turn out?
I was told by everyone who knew that they were excellent, that they were higher than normal. They were way higher than normal in New York City. We were never able to, find Nielsen actual numbers, but everybody that I asked about it remembered it that way, and TV historians as well.
Someone was curious, how had this week been promoted? Had it been promoted, or
We looked. We didn't find as much promotion as you would expect. If something like that happened now. There were definitely some newspaper articles. I think the Times covered it. TV Guide covered it. Black Jet and Ebony covered it as big news. It was in the TV Guide listings, although they were wrong about the nights. But I don't know how that happened. I know that there were as there always are. There were schedule problems, and people wound up slotting in, and then they were supposed to be the next night, whatever. And then the person who was late came the next night. It was a little bit of a rolling party, so to speak. But it was treated as news. I don't know that we never found any advertising. We did find some publicity stills that they did, but we're not sure how they were used.
And just thinking about that, I just need to to answer the question a little bit for myself, that marketing and promotion, how different than it is today. So
right,
it very well could have just been a surprise for many to that Monday to be going to bed, falling asleep, watching the Tonight Show, and maybe you never knew. Maybe most of America never knew when there was a guest host, but.
If you paid attention to TV Guide, you would know it. It was definitely there we found it. It was there every night that he was the guest host, and there was a little article about it. So, I don't know how much people knew in advance. What I do know is Black people knew in advance. Black people, it went through networks, and so it was a real event that people let their kids stay up for, and really made a big deal out of it. It meant a lot to Black people in this country when it happened.
We have a question from someone who I can tell has seen the documentary. Someone was curious, Joan, you had worked with a gentleman who had made recordings, who had made audio recordings, who worked with you.
Oh, yeah.
Share a little bit. What else was in that gentleman's collection, or how in the world did you find this individual?
Ron Simon, who's a great TV historian, who is an archivist at the Paley Center for television. It's changed its name, but everybody calls it the Paley Center. We sat down with Ron, and he was, really excellent. And it was after the interview that he emailed us and said, I remember knowing about this guy, Phil Grease, who started as a teenager recording shows on a big reel-to-reel, no video, but reel-to-reel audio recordings. And he started doing it as a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. I think he was like 14 years old. And he was trying to get more, and then he wound up being all kinds of popular shows, a whole lot of stuff. But he did have 1.5, basically, shows that he had recorded. And that was incredible. Even though it was only audio, we were able to kind of liven it up with art from the time. But that gave us the Smothers Brothers, making some political jokes and
right.
Really be quite funny, giving you a feeling for what their role was, and thanking Harry for letting them do the distasteful material that CBS, their network, wouldn't let them do. you get a real warm conversation between him and Lena Horne, and you really see the friendship there that they go way back. Um, what else? Those were the two major finds. He also had the Kennedy um, interview, but we already had that, the video of that. He had a stand-up routine by Bill Cosby that we just couldn't, we didn't fit it in. Just a little, it was just a little bit much, but it gave you just a sense of, and he had also the audio narration of those home movies that he showed to show his family water skiing. And we were able, from either him himself or his daughter Gina, who you saw in that clip, to get the actual movie so we could sync them up with the narration and the video that people were watching. So that's kind of a rare thing that we wouldn't
that's
even
magical.
Yeah, it's really magical. Also, because so much of it is in black and white, and that's suddenly color. So yeah, we really owe a lot to Phil. He just, and it was just kind of a funny story within the story. He's got this archive on Long Island, and he's got every kind of radio equipment, from the last 50 years, and he was incredibly generous with his time and his materials.
And he must have been just absolutely delighted when he got a call.
He was.
I mean, the gentleman's been doing this since he was, before he was a teenager, recording Dodgers games, and now is part of documentaries. So
yeah, no, he was very happy.
We have a number of more questions that I think probably best answered by watching the documentary. But while we have you here, we'd be remiss, Joan, to not ask about what was it like the cooperation or collaboration or working with interviewing Mr. Belafonte and some of the other guests. You made a reference that you were tracking down some guests. Share a little bit about how you did that, and especially what it was like working with Mr. Belafonte.
He was amazing. He gave us so much of his time. He gave us about an hour and a half, came up to Harlem, where I currently live about a block away from where he lived when he was a child. So that was kind of a cool draw. And Melba's, the restaurateur, gave us her extra room for an afternoon, and we set up there. So it was really fun. And that, as I said, was about 90 minutes. And then we wound up bringing on, we realized none of us had directed before. We needed a real director. And we found Yoruba Richin, who had done many things. She was coming off Smithsonian documentary on the real Green Book story, not the white Hollywood story. She's just finished a really wonderful film on 6 Black women celebrities, including Lena Horne, how it feels to be free. She was just incredible, and we met with her, and it was we had a list of people that we were going to interview, and we never met with anybody else again. So when Yoruba came on, she had different questions. It just made sense, not entirely, but. And we'd learned more. We contacted more guests and talked to more people about it. So he gave us another hour and a half, and he invited us to his apartment, and we sat in his living room for at least an hour and a half. Put up with us setting up the cameras and all of that not fun stuff.
May I show that picture? We have you.
Oh, sure.
Joan shared with us a beautiful, beautiful picture. I'd love to share it right now. What a fantastic afternoon it must have been.
It really was. And he's just it's like a museum, the pictures he has, and it was really lovely. And you can just see how generous he was. Harlem American, and no one's commented or tried to say that I'm not the person in this picture, but during the pandemic, I just let my white hair come out. So it's pretty funny to look at these things and be like, yeah, that was me not that long ago, but it was something to do during the pandemic.
When I return to my barber, I don't think he's going to recognize me when I walk through the door, having not seen that gentleman for 14 months either. So,
oh my goodness, yeah,
it's had its impact on all of us. We had another question, Joan. Did you find out more? Was it protocol? Was it just standard business practice? Why back then were recordings not saved? Is it because the show was not, it wasn't considered almost like the news, maybe because it wouldn't be played again? Did you find out why they weren't not saving the recordings?
That's a really interesting question, because although we know that big news events were saved, years ago, whenever we had the 50th anniversary of the JFK assassination, NBC just ran its footage from that weekend, the whole thing, in so-called real time. So clearly things like that were saved, and that was 63. But I don't know if every, Walter Cronkite, broadcast was saved. I just don't know. But in the non-news side of things, it was not uncommon. It was, first of all, one interesting thing is the tapes are like 2 inches wide, and so tonight's show is like a block like this, and so storing them was a real problem. It really added up. But I just don't think they were cheap. And I just don't think they saw it as history. And I think they discovered it when somebody had the great idea of doing like reruns. Johnny's going away, instead of having a guest host or as an alternative, why don't we do some greatest hits, when he's gone or whatever. And they were like, they don't exist. And that was, I think, I say it in the film, I can't believe I've forgotten by now already, but I think it was like 70 or 71 when they realized that, and they stopped it. So it was not uncommon. They didn't think of it as living history. And it wasn't, in the digital world, we can save everything pretty much, It wasn't like that.
Oh, it's one of those things like it's like you and I had discussed, before this call. I mean, my goodness, if you had gotten to see some of those performances, Dionne Warwick or Aretha Franklin or someone else, another guest who has seen the documentary also pointed out, when a guest asked about was the show promoted, marketed, advertised, there were only 3 networks, so it was a much different landscape.
Right.
I don't even know what was opposite the Tonight Show at that time.
Well, I should know that, because in the little TV guide excerpts we have, you can see that. And I'm just not remembering. There was nothing else like it. There was no competition. Joey Bishop had a show, if anyone remembers Joey Bishop, a talk show for a little while at I think it was on at 11, but it didn't last very long. So right, but this was the only place, as several people make in the film, this was, if you were watching TV at night, this is where you were. There was a remember the late show afterwards, but that was for insomniacs. But
we had another question, someone following up on something you shared in your research. Had there been any trouble, I guess, I don't know if that's quite the right word. How did advertisers for that week respond, since you share that story that some of the advertisers really wanted to get involved in programming?
Right. To my knowledge, and to Harry's knowledge, and to one of my favorite finds was Johnny Carson's secretary, who was about 23 at that point. And she remembers complaints, but not from advertisers. Doesn't mean there weren't any. And we include this in the film very, very famously. About a month later, Harry gets invited to be on a show with one of his guests, Petula Clark. She then invites him to her show, her special, the next month, and they sing a song, and she winds up touching his arm. It's a very moving anti-war song, and the sponsor freaked out. Apparently, I believe he was there, like watching the taping, and was, you're going to have to do this over. And she said no. And that became a big deal, even bigger than his time on the Tonight Show, because that special was promoted, and but she stood up to him, and the touch, as it was called, stayed in.
We could have you on. The Arts Club. We could have you on for another program, Joan. There was. I did want to ask, as we get near the closing, Mr. Belafonte appeared back on the Tonight Show. Was it a couple weeks afterwards? I forget if this is in the documentary or article or both.
It's in the documentary, and now I'm forgetting exactly when it was, but it was after. Here's the thing is, Petula Clark's show was taped like March 2nd, but it didn't air until something like April 2nd. So I think it had not aired yet, but the controversy, Harry let it be known, and other people too, even before it ran, Harry let it be known that this had happened. And there was lots of coverage of that. So he talks to Johnny and Ed about that. And that was something we found pretty late in our research. That was really a find. And also Johnny congratulates him, on doing such a good job, and tells him how, what a natural he was, which was kind of cute. And Harry says the whole experience was groovy, which I was like, that's a period piece.
Yes. Oh, well, that describes this time with you. Thank you very much, Joan, on behalf of the National Arts Club, on behalf of the Roundtable Committee, on behalf of all of our guests. Thank you for sharing your time with us and for producing this fantastic, historic, funny, entertaining, charming documentary. I have seen it 3 times, and will be watching it again after having spoken with you.
Thank you so much.
I want to share with all guests, we've had so many questions that I believe would be best answered by watching the documentary. It's available at peacocktv.com, where anyone can watch it there. And Joan's work can be found through her social media accounts, which we've shared throughout our conversation, and at The Nation, which is thenation.com. So thank you very much again, Joan. And this fall or this winter, please let us host you and guest friends for drinks at the club parlor, and please let us give you a tour of the National Arts Club.
Absolutely. I will definitely do that. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
You are welcome, and thank you again. And to all of our guests, thank you, and we bid you a very heartfelt good night.